Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Pangolin Advisor and I'll be analyzing Volter's ships. This is episode 2 of the series. Last time I was taking a look at the Southern hulls, this time it is time for the Volters. Before we jump in, I have to give you a brief description of the Volters because it is important. The Volters themselves are a faction that is centered around science, gain and defense, and they're very good at both of those things. They're very competitive. They can also create portals that allow their fleets to travel from one place to another in an instant. Keep that in mind because while Volters are irritatingly awesome on the planet's surface, they are a laughingstock in space, and let's have a quick look why. I would like to begin our journey through the Volter ship designs by starting with Karve. That's the default name of a ship of the Quarrel-class variety, which is a small attacker. So let's have a quick look at it. And that's the wrong ship, that's the right one. And as you can clearly see, it's about as durable as an arrow, so it's a very well named hull type, because it has 2 weapon slots on the side, 2 utility slots and a utility/defense module. There are other attacker ships with only 1 defensive module, although it is the lowest amount in its class. However, out of all of those ships, this ship boasts the least amount of firepower, meaning that it tries to be a glass cannon, but of all the other glass cannons it deals the least amount of damage, making it a rather poor glass cannon. Okay, there is the exception that I did omit, and that's the Quarrel attacker, which also only has 1 potential defensive slot and 2 weapon slots. But I would say that the Quarrel attacker is actually better than yours for a very simple reason, and that is because your weapon slots are on the side, on both broadsides. And you have no weapons top mounted to your ship, meaning that you only have 120 degrees firing angle on both of those weapons. Of course times 2 since you have broadsides on both sides of your ship, but if somebody's dead ahead of you, you're not gonna be able to fire at that ship, and that is a substantial disadvantage in certain situations. So you should definitely keep that in mind. Although it is not a very big deal, but it is still worth mentioning. Now, with that in mind, this ship is really just... it's pretty bad, let's be entirely honest about this. But let's have a quick look at what happens when you decide to upgrade it. Does it get any better? As you can see, upgrading this ship gives you 3 extra modules, an additional weapon, additional defense slot and a defense/utility slot. Now this finally gives you a few more options. For instance, even if you max out on the weapons and then decide to go for defense, you actually have some relatively fair protection, and the Volters do have some special protection unlockable for them, which I usually don't mention because that's not what the series is about, but in this case I suppose I could. Then you could add an amplifier, for instance, and maybe something else, or just ignore this module slot altogether. And I wouldn't blame you if you did ignore it altogether, honestly, because this ship is not that great. It's not the worst necessarily, and it would be relatively decent with some protection, but you have to keep in mind that it's not going to do itself any favors, and if you treat it as a glass cannon, you find it vastly underperforming, and it will go down like flies without the extra protection. But at the same time, I find a hard time justifying the research involved with researching this ship and then researching its upgrade just so that it can survive a few hits from the enemy. Of course, the Volters are a scientist-heavy faction, so maybe you have the science to spare to do it, but is it worth it? I wouldn't be so sure, so let us move on to the next ship. The ship that could and should make this ship worth it. The ship that is supposed to protect this ship from damage. Is it capable of doing so? Let us find out. The next ship in line is the Knarr, if I am pronouncing this correctly, which is the protector class type of ship rather, and it's of the boat class variety. So let's have a look at the boat class, and what do we find? We find a ship with 1 top-mounted weapon, thank goodness for a top-mounted one, which I would probably equip with flak most of the time. And additionally 2 extra utility slots and 2 utility/defense slots. This ship does not have a great synergy with your weak attacker, and that is because your attacker needs to have as much protection as it can get, because it itself is made out of paper, especially in early game when it is unupgraded. This ship unfortunately is also, well, not necessarily made out of paper. It is sturdier, bolt is again a fitting name, but not sturdier by much, at most holding only 2 defense modules, which isn't necessarily ideal. So it doesn't really synergize all that well with your other small attacker, meaning that honestly, if I were you, I would most likely just skip those 2 ships altogether. But before you do that, this boat class ship does have its uses. For instance, if you take into consideration that it has a maximum of 4 utility slots to be used, it makes it into a great taxi service, so that's already 1 use, as well as a decent manpower transport. So plenty of uses over there, but additionally something that you have to take into consideration is the upgrade you can supply this ship with. Let us go and have a look at it. Once you upgrade the boat class, it is equipped with an additional side-mounted weapon, as well as an extra defense and utility module, and now you can see this ship taking shape into something that you could arguably take with you into combat as a combat support ship of sorts. You could use one of its many utility slots to provide your fleet with amp benefits, such as fleet cloaking, fleet shield, or other things that increase, for instance, your crew distraction, and so on and so forth. I wouldn't use this again as a ship to protect the rest of your fleet, because it doesn't have too many defensive options, although 3 is at the very least better than what you had before. So you could potentially think about using it such a way. But still, compared with other protector ships for other factions, this ship is okay in a vacuum, but it's not great either, because there are many ships that have either equal or better defense/utility setup, so don't expect it to be a source of advantage for you. And again, I said in a vacuum this is a decent ship, but unfortunately it doesn't really fit with the Volter attacker ships all that well, meaning that it is not performing well its job in the Volter fleet, and that it is now time for us to simply move on to bigger and better ships. Alright, I admit, I lied to you a little bit. I said moving on to bigger and better ships, but Longship, which is the default name for the Quarrel-class Volter ship of the Hunter variety. This ship may be bigger, but it is by no means better. First of all, let us count down the number of modules it has. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 modules in total. 7 modules. Sounds like not a lot, does it? Indeed, this ship and the Horatio Hunter have the least amount of modules out of all unupgraded hunters in the game, so it is already starting with a big disadvantage. Moreover, let us have a quick look at its weapon locations. And as you can see, all of its weapons are located on the side. They don't have a single top-mounted turret, and I already explained that the top-mounted weapons are slightly better than the broadside weapons, which is an additional downside. And this is one of 4 broadside-only ships in the game, talking about hunters of course, unupgraded ones at that. All in all, taking all of this into account, we then have to take a quick look at some of its other factors. For instance, its utility slot and 2 utility/defense modules and a defense module. And you may be thinking to yourself, okay, well sure, it is relatively balanced, is it not? It sounds fine to me. I'm sorry to break it to you, but out of the weapons, out of the ships that only have 3 guns, this guy is the least tanky. Excluding the Ambaqua trash collector, but we don't need to worry about that guy. So it is really quite squishy, and it doesn't really offer much firepower to compensate for its flaws. Does it have a redeeming factor? Well, yes it does. It's the fact that out of all the ships in your roster, this one is the most likely candidate for you to upgrade. In fact, if you bother researching a hunter ship at all as a Volter, I would say you absolutely have to upgrade it, and here's why. Once you upgrade the Quarrel class, you actually gain not just 3 additional module slots, but 4. The large one at the top, finally a top-mounted turret, a side-mounted turret unfortunately, a utility slot and a utility/defense slot, bringing you in line with other hunters. It is unfortunate that you have to spend an additional technology and strategic resources to simply play catch-up with hunters of other factions, but at the same time, Vultures do have good science and they do usually have good strategic resource income, so it shouldn't be as big of a deal for you as it would be for other factions, but nevertheless, make no mistake, this is still a drawback. So now that this ship is upgraded, let's talk about its matchups. Does it have any good matchups? Well, unupgraded, obviously it doesn't. So, and upgraded, it also doesn't have all that many good matchups, ignoring the Umbroquois, which is a trash compartment, and I should just stop mentioning their poor hunter, which doesn't belong anywhere, honestly, other than in trash. Anyway, if you, for instance, try to use this unupgraded ship against less tanky hunters, or upgraded ship for that matter, and go up against a Hisho or a Riftborn hunter, thinking that, oh hey, those guys have nil defense, I can just fly up to them and just pepper them with firepower and they'll be gone. No. They'll open fire, just at the same time as you open fire, and then as a result they'll be damaged and you will be gone, obliterated, disintegrated, munched into a pulp if you think your hunter has even the slightest chance unupgraded. Facing against a Riftborn hunter, you're so mistaken, I feel sorry for you. The Riftborn hunter is just going to, like, you might as well just run rather than fight, unless you're desperate. Upgrades, as I said, do even the odds somewhat, but still don't expect for the Riftborn or Hisho to do any favors when fighting you. They're gonna tear you to shreds, even though it's going to be a little bit harder for them. So, on the other hand, if you take a look at some of the tanky hunters, for instance the Vodiani hunter, and you go at them thinking, oh yeah, those guys have no weapons, we're just gonna destroy them in a second. You're gonna open fire, the Volter hunter is gonna look at you, be like, what is this guy doing? And then they're gonna return fire, and sure, they're not gonna return all that much firepower, but eventually, at the end, you're going to be dust, and they'll be looking at you thinking, oh, he was attacking us, I see. So yeah, that's essentially the problem with the Hunter class. No feasibly good matchups, although once you do upgrade it, it will do okay against the Sylphon Hunter, Craver Hunter, Horatio Hunter, obviously the Umbroquois Hunter, and maybe the United Empire Hunter. I'm getting a little bit hesitant saying it would do okay, but I think it might. It will still underperform in all of those listed matchups, but it can stand its ground, so at the very least it's not completely one-sided, and if you think of a clever flotilla composition, or if you simply outperform your enemy in terms of your technology or production values, well then you can win, obviously. But that's the reality when you just look at the ship whole alone, and with that let us move on to a coordinator. The next ship for us to talk about is the Drekar. That's the default name for a short class coordinator Vulture ship. Having a quick look at it, I don't know, but I feel like that's the wrong one. I feel like maybe the Vultures had too many shots when designing the ship, and based on the Endless Cocktails PDF that Upload Studios released, I think that might exactly be the case. Because, for whatever reason, this ship has, well, let's have a look. 2 guns, 1 top mounted, which is a nice sight for sore eyes, but unnecessary for a coordinator ship. 1, 2, 3 dedicated utility slots, 2 utility/defense slot, and a single defense slot. All of this speaks to me, hey, I'm made out of paper, yay! Because unfortunately, this ship is the least tanky of all coordinator ships in the game, together with the Craver coordinator, which is equally squishy. Unfortunately, however, I would say this is exactly what the Vultures didn't need in their fleet, and neither do you, because you are desperate for ships that can tank damage for your other ships that are also rather weak. This guy instead is a Swiss Army knife with a bunch of utility slots, which might sound nice for other factions, but all of your other ships already have a very good amount of utility slots. If you are looking for a battlefield buffing ship, this guy won't do very well for you, for the very simple reason that it will not be able to survive enemy firepower for very long periods of time. Sure, it has 9500 health, but with 3 defense module slots, that is rough, that's fairly rough. But let's have a look at what happens when you upgrade it. We always have to be fair. And now, seeing its upgrades, the extra large weapon module, defense/weapon module and a utility module, I can safely say that, well, there is no saving grace for this ship, really. It is still mostly meant to be a ship that gives your fleet a lot of utility, but it doesn't really have the survivability to support that fact. In fact, and you know, I was trash talking the Quarrel early on, I'm sorry to say this, but Quarrel, they actually have a better coordinator ship than you, and you know something is wrong when Quarrel have a better ship design than yours is. So the biggest drawback of the ship is, like I said, that it doesn't really fit the rest of your fleet. It is very squishy. It has quite a few utility slots, but at the same time you don't need them. That's also a bit of an overkill. Okay, I'll tell you what this ship is really good at, far better than the smaller ships. That, again, transporting troops. But you already had a ship that could potentially perform this role. That was the smaller protector ship. But sure, it can do that, and if you're looking for, you know, something to buff your fleet, I suppose you could go for one of those guys instead of 3 upgraded protector ships. But I would honestly rather go for 3 upgraded protector ships, because I feel like they'll be more worthwhile, they'll cost me less strategic resources. It depends on your resource situation, but even then, this ship is quite poor, whereas your protectors, let's have a quick look at them again, just for comparison reasons. They don't have a lot of defensive modules, but I mean, they still have 3, but that's half of what as the coordinator has, keep in mind, because coordinators, to show you again, have twice the amount of modules on every single module slot. Nevertheless, still, I would say that having just 3 boat-class ships is better than having 1 of your shot-class ship if you are looking for something to support your fleet during combat. So I would say that there is basically almost no reason for you to bother with a shot, unless you're looking for something to carry large amount of troops planet side, which is still a fair argument to make since the Vultures are very good at planet side combat. So for that reason, sure, grab it, but don't expect it to do you any favors in combat. Finally, the moment of truth, the Vulture carrier, nicknamed Skeid in auto design, a Spear-class ship, which is, well, as I said, a large carrier vessel. Is this the saving grace for the Vulture fleet? Kind of. Let's have a look at this, shall we? So what does the Spear class has in store for us? Well, first of all, unfortunately, yet again, it is the least tanky of all carriers in the game. In fact, now there isn't any other in the game that is quite as fragile as this one. Although, actually, I spoke with Sun, I forgot Horatio are there as well, and Horatio also have an equally small amount of defense modules, but at the same time, Horatio do have 3000 more health than you do. So, yeah, you are objectively less tanky than the Horatio are, sorry to say this. Now, of course, carriers can perform other roles in combat, for instance, offensive roles, but your carrier isn't very well suited for that either. It's not bad, it's more or less standard in terms of its weapon loadout, although, again, too many weapons on broadsides and only 1 at the top. But while it's at the low end of the spectrum for damage, it's, well, still just low end of the spectrum of damage rather than pitiful last place, ha ha ha, we don't care about you. So that's at the very least something, some saving grace for it. It also has 3 dedicated utility slots, which is nice, and honestly, all in all, thankfully, this carrier is a relatively well balanced design with equal emphasis on weapons, defense and utility. Maybe a little bit too little emphasis on non-utility stuff. Because again, this could be an amazing utility support vessel with so many utility modules. Like, look at that, you could have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 utility slots. That is a lot, but please don't use all of them for utility modules, that would be quite bad. However, Good news is that in a vacuum, this fighter, this carrier rather, even unupgraded, could match and beat the firepower of Umbra and also match the firepower of the Cravers, although I would say that the Cravers do have the advantage because they have top-mounted weapons, whereas you don't. So what happens when you upgrade your carrier? It gives you a bit of much needed survivability. In fact, I would say that this is almost an essential upgrade for you to have, because the 2 extra defense module slots are nothing to ignore, and an extra blank slot is always nice to have as well. The utility slot was certainly not needed, and the extra large weapon slot is standard for every single carrier. So let's have a quick think about this. First of all, this ship has the most amount of quadrinics. That was quadrinics, right? I'm not mixing things up, right? Yes, quadrinics, sorry. So yeah, this ship is the most reliant carrier, is the most quadrinics reliant carrier in the game. All others require less quadrinics to employ its full potential, but the good news is that most likely you won't be using this one utility slot unless you have a lot of utility modules researched and very good ideas on how to use them. But either way, how does this ship perform? Well, it is again, at the very least, a staple, a backbone for your fleet in fact, because of how versatile and reliable it is. Well, actually it is not versatile, but it's just a jack of all trades is the word I was actually looking for. It is probably going to be what's carrying you into the late game, that and possibly your hunter and protector ships. Think of the combination you like most, but these are ships that you can feasibly rely on, and again you most likely have the technology advantage and resource advantage, so you will actually be able to fuel a decent amount of those carriers with upgrades, meaning that you will actually perform quite well in combat against obviously factions that don't have the same luxury. Now, once you do upgrade this ship, how good is it in a vacuum? Well, it is a decent match against only 2 carriers, that being a Lumeris carrier and the Umbra carrier, but, and this is a slightly painful part, the Umbra carrier, once upgraded, is actually better than your upgraded carrier, because again it does have those top mounted weapon slots. So there you go. It's not the worst, it's very close to being the worst, either upgraded or unupgraded, but you can at the very least rely on it. Sure, it's not very good, but your fleet needs whatever, and this ship at least can pretend like it can support that need in your fleet, and yeah, I would say you can rely on it. And look, I'm talking mostly in a vacuum. In a realistic game, again, usually you're going to have many other advantages that make up for the weakness of your hulls, so don't be afraid when you look at the water ships and you think, wow, these really aren't that good. They're not, they don't have to be, so don't worry about it. Finally, it is time to talk about civilian vessels, or civilian-ish vessels in case of the explorer ship. So let's start with the Argosy first. Vultures don't have a dedicated colony ship, or rather they do have a very dedicated colony ship, because they can only have a single one, the Argosy itself. As you can see, it has 2 dedicated utility modules and 3 utility/defense modules, which is more modules than you usually see on colonizers, but again you can only have one of those ships at any given time, which is why it is objectively better than the other colonizers. So there's a reason for that. It also can have a good use out of its defense slots, because if it, in worst case scenario, gets caught by your enemies, you want it to be able to survive the salvos and then to run away. Although ideally this will never happen, which is why I think you can safely just fuel it with as many engines as you want and have it zoom around the universe, colonizing every planet you have. The cool thing about this colony ship is that it's extraordinarily fast for a colony ship. The bad news is that you can only have one. And now it brings us to a scout vessel. Now, other factions usually can use potentially their colony ships as scouts, and sometimes they even outperform scouts for that role. You don't have that luxury. If you want to make a scout vessel, you just go for the Dart class, and that's the only thing you can do. So the Dart class, this is an upgraded version. Usually the unupgraded version has one less support module, but still it is actually quite good. In fact, it's probably the only ship in the Volter fleet that truly shines when compared to its competition, because it has 1, 2, 3, 4 potential utility slots when unupgraded, and keep in mind, it's an explorer ship. You don't really care about its weapon loadouts, you don't really care about its armor, you just want it to get from point A to point B fast and maybe fire some probes while it is around point B. And this ship is very good at that. So at the very least, the voters can get away from the ship haul competition by saying, look, we know that our warships aren't the best, but at least our scout ship really is quite something. Not the best, but quite something, and I think it is really just a lovely piece of ship to finish us off on a bit more of a positive notice than what we had before. So ladies and gentlemen, this was Pangolin Advisor. Thank you very much for watching this guide. I hope that you liked it and that you learned something today with me. Now I do have something to say that is I would like to bring your attention to, and that is the fact that I actually got very good response to the first guide, and I'd like to thank you for that formally. It made me happy when I saw people appreciate the first video. I did, however, also notice that it got rather low views compared to my other guides, meaning that probably people aren't as interested in learning more about ship hulls than other things this game has to offer, which is not unexpected, honestly. I did think that might happen, and I'm still willing to continue making those guides for every single faction in the game. But I would really appreciate if you could try to spread the word a little bit, tell people of this guide series, and also help me improve it. If you have any comments, if you think that some segment of this guide could be improved, is unnecessary, or should be added, maybe a better intro should be devised, maybe I'm talking too fast or too slow or whatever, maybe I should be more or less enthusiastic, maybe I should focus on one extra aspect of the ship or ignore a certain aspect of the ship. Tell me all those things, please, so I have some information to improve upon. I would love the feedback. But nevertheless, still, I really appreciate all the positive feedback I got so far. It makes me rather happy, and I'll continue working on further series, which, by the way, the next videos should appear sooner than this one did. The reason why it took me so long for the second video of the series to come out, to produce, is because I was organizing my Excel spreadsheets, because I had spreadsheets for all ships in the game, all the stuff they have on them and whatnot, but I was trying to make them look nicer because that was a lot of numbers, and I wanted to improve that. So now that I have better view of everything, I can finally have a little bit of an easier time when trying to determine how things look. Although I still need to work on those things because they break. The spreadsheets, I mean. They still need improvement, but it's better. I'm getting where I want to be. Anyway, once again, thank you very much for watching and for watching this extra outro segment. And if you want to vote on what the next faction will be, you will be able to do that on Twitter. Okay, I already know what the third faction will be. I'll keep that a secret for now. But if you want to vote on what the fourth faction will be, I'll probably create a poll on Twitter once the next video is posted, so just remember about that. Again, thank you for watching. I'm saying this for like the third time already, and I'll see you online.